Welcome to the third presentation in the series Vision of Healing. We're studying the book of Revelation, and the topic today is who, what, where, when, and why. That is to say, how did this book come into existence? So we are still doing preliminaries. We are not in the text as yet. So let's go to it. Who? So we have four times in the text that the who question is answered. We have in verse 1 already, it says, he made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. So John is a name here in Revelation already in the first verse. And then a little later in the first chapter, John to the 7 churches that are in Asia. So he is now writing a letter to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. And then he writes in 1:9, I, John, your brother who share with you in Jesus the trials, was on the island called Patmos. So here John is, whoever he is, establishes a connection with the recipient. They are in the same boat, as it were. And then we read, I, John, this is in the final chapter, I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. So there is a John in this book who identifies himself as the source and author of the book of Revelation. So we have a John. Now, John who? So we look at the internal evidence. By internal evidence we mean evidence from the book of Revelation and evidence from the New Testament, because we know from reading the New Testament that there is a John among the disciples of Jesus, and we wonder if is he the John. So here are 3 questions. Was he John, the son of Zebedee, known in the Gospels? Early on, in the core group of disciples of Jesus, in all the Gospels, there is a John, and he is the son of Zebedee. And many people think that the John, son of Zebedee, is the author of the Gospel of John. Now that is less a given than we might think, but that's how we start. Was he John, the son of Zebedee, known in the Gospels? And then we will have to ask, is that John? This is the crux here with regard to the Gospel of John. Is that John identical with the beloved disciple in the Gospel of John, the source and author of that Gospel? So what's the problem? The problem is that there is a figure in the Gospel of John called the beloved disciple. He is a key person. He is there at the supper, he is there at the cross, he is there at the tomb, he is there in the final departure scene of Jesus at the Sea of Galilee. The beloved disciple is there, but the Gospel of John never says that the beloved disciple is John. So there is a kind of subtlety there, and yes, John, the son of Zebedee, is a strong candidate for the beloved disciple, but there are other contenders. Well, I will adjudicate this in favor of John, the son of Zebedee, but it is not something you can do just without any sort of discussion or evidence. So when I wrote my commentary on the book of Revelation, I felt I needed to establish this or answer this question very clearly, because most readers of Revelation do not believe that the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation have the same author. They think that the differences between these 2 texts is too great to support a notion of the same authorship. So I had a long long chapter, and then I turned in a long manuscript, and my publisher, editors, they said, well, it's great stuff, but it's too long. So now you have to use your knife and sort of cut it and slice it, and you know, that was painful, because I had put a lot of work into the question of authorship. But I have to take a shortcut then, I had to do it then, and I have to do it now. I'm just asking you, I'm just featuring to you the issues. Is that John, if he is the beloved disciple, is the John the son of Zebedee, then we have solved an issue there. So question number 3, if the answer to number 2 is yes, is I, John, in Revelation, that John? Because all we know from the Gospel of John is that the source of that Gospel is the beloved disciple. But we don't know for sure if he is John. In Revelation, we know for sure that the author is John. But we don't know for sure whether he is the beloved disciple and also the John of the Gospel of John. That is an issue, and good people do not think he is the same person. I think that may be possible to solve it. So let's look at the external evidence. By external evidence, we look outside the Bible. We look at early sources, church fathers, and things like that. And there is an early church father, his name was Irenaeus. He was born in Smyrna, today's Izmir, which is one of the 7 cities of the book of Revelation, one of the 7 churches in Revelation. And his birth date is probably around 140. So he's in the 2nd century, about something like 50 years after the book of Revelation was written. So he is a pretty good source. He is not 100% reliable, most people think, but he's not a bad source. You really have to take him seriously to some extent. So what does he think? He thinks like this. Lastly, John, the disciple of the Lord, who had leant back on his breast, that is a quotation or a hint to the Gospel of John chapter 13, who had leant back on his breast, once more set forth the gospel while residing at Ephesus in Asia. So here Irenaeus says that there is a John. He was the one who was sitting next to Jesus. He was there at the last at that supper, and he was the writer of the Gospel of John. External evidence. And then he says a little later, John beheld the apocalyptic vision, Revelation, for that was seen not very long time since, but almost in our day, towards the end of Domitian's reign. So here the external evidence, now looking at early sources after the after the book was written, we have Irenaeus saying, same author, telling us where he was and the time when it was written. So he adjudicates in favor of us knowing which John it was. And I am saying that that requires a somewhat longer argument than I have done here, but I favor that view. I think there is evidence inside the books, in the Gospel of John, in the book of Revelation, that the thematic similarities between those two books have been underprojected, and that one has gotten too hung up on the stylistic differences. Now, Austin Ferrer here, he says his name, John, is enough. He writes as if there were no other John. And that is true. I mean, you say, I, John, and everyone knows who you are. And that type of self-identification, in my view, shortens the list for plausible candidates. There will not be 10 Johns. He writes as though there is only one. So we go on. Where? So, where? I, John, your brother, who share with you in Jesus the trials, was on the island called Patmos. And here is a picture of Patmos. It's a small island. And here is its location off the coast of Turkey and quite close in a straight line from Ephesus, from the city of Ephesus on the Turkish mainland. And Ephesus is the first of the 7 churches, and we remember that Irenaeus says that John was living in Ephesus at some point, and now he is not in Ephesus, and if he is that John, he is now on the island of Patmos. And then the question is, why is he there? Is he there because of persecution, or is he there because of mission? Most people think he's there because there was persecution. That is not 100% sure, but let's just say that we don't need to settle that. So we go on to the what question, and this is requires a somewhat longer discussion, a longer what should I say, investigation. So let's read Revelation 1:1. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to make known to his servants what must soon take place. He made it known, and I have added for the same price in symbolic language by sending his angel to his servant John. So here we have the key word is the word apocalypsis, or apocalypsis, let's pronounce it that way. The opening word of Revelation is apocalypsis in Greek, and that is a telling word. The short meaning of it is actually what comes out here in my illustration, that the word means revelation, but revelation in English is a weaker word and less specific word than the sort of connotation, the sort of tenor of the word apocalypsis in Greek. There is a specific meaning to it. When you look at this word in its basic components, this word is composed of a preposition, apo, and a verb, kalypto. So if you do kalypto, you cover something up. If you do apokalypto, you uncover something. So the revelation is not just an uncovering, but it could also be an uncovering of something that has been covered up. So there is a correction to a problem. That's what I think we should take from it. And then we have a kind of redundancy in this verse, a redundancy of repeating in various words in Greek the same meaning in English. Making known, to make known, to make known, to make known. There is a kind of repetitiousness there, but we could translate apocalypsis as making known, and we could say that for the other two words there that appear later, deiknumi and semaino, that they also mean to make known. So making known is the key here in the opening. So that's the answer to the what question, that we have an apocalypsis that aims to make something known. Where did this come from? Well, it came from the Old Testament, and it came especially from the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, who is an exile in Babylon, he is called in to the king of that time, King Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar has had a dream that he cannot remember. And to make a long story short, Daniel is called upon to explain this dream. First, he has to explain a dream that the king cannot remember. That's strange, isn't it? He has to know the dream without anyone telling it to him, except God doing that. That's what the story says. And then Daniel will say to the king again and again that God is a certain kind of person. He makes known. He knows. And you see here, he uses the word apocalypto. So here the terminology for the book of Revelation is already found in the book of Daniel. That's not unimportant. And then he says, you have made known, you have made known. And again, here is another word that appears in Revelation in the first verse. So we have terminology that has a story. And then there is a God in heaven who makes known. So this notion that the book of Revelation, the what of Revelation, is answered by an appeal to the kind of person God is. What kind of person is God? He is a person who makes known. He is a know-maker, you might say. And that is not uncontroversial claim in our time. So let me summarize or put this together in a couple of points, 3 points here. Daniel bequeaths to Revelation the language of apocalypse. The first verses in Revelation are sated with terms widely used in the story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And number 2, that story is itself the go-to story of knowledge that doesn't originate in the human realm. That is to say, knowledge that doesn't come from the human head. Knowledge that comes from outside, from an outside source, from another source. It is knowledge we cannot generate on our own. Daniel then, and now Revelation, rests on the conviction that God communicates with human beings. There is a no-maker in heaven. That is what we get from verse 1 on the what question. Now, I could stop there, but I think we need to digress just ever so slightly and think about how this works, because Daniel has dreams, Daniel has visions, and the boundaries between dream and vision is blurred in the book of Daniel. So dreams and visions, that is a kind of extrasensory perception that is there in this book. And in our time, in the 19th century, 20th century, we had a phenomenal interpreter of dreams, Sigmund Freud, who lived in Vienna, who had to flee the Nazis and died in England. He wrote a book called The Interpretation of Dreams. So what's interesting about Sigmund Freud? He's Jewish. He is an interpreter of dreams, like Joseph in Egypt, far back in the Old Testament, like Daniel in Babylon, later in biblical history, and now Sigmund Freud writing a book about how to interpret dreams that in some ways closes the door that has been opened by Joseph and Daniel, that there is a certain way for God to communicate, to give to us knowledge that we have not generated ourselves. And all these statements from Freud are scientific consideration of dreams. Starts off from the assumption that they are products of our own mental activity. That would not be true for the claims made in Daniel and Revelation. When the work of interpretation has been completed, we perceive that a dream is the fulfillment of a wish. Well, that's not exactly true either. for what comes to light in those books. We are not in general in a position to interpret another person's dream unless he is prepared to communicate to us the unconscious thought that lie behind its content. Well, that doesn't work either, because Nebuchadnezzar's problem is precisely that he cannot tell anyone his dream. You see, we have some discrepancies here. It will no doubt have surprised all of us to be told that dreams are nothing other than fulfillments of wishes, not only on account of the contradiction offered by anxiety dreams, so on. Anyway, I just thought I needed to bring that in, because we live in a time where the claim that there is communication from outside the human realm into our realm is a claim that Revelation makes against claims to the contrary. Okay, one more thing. What and then what? So, this word, apocalypse, is the opening word in Revelation, has become the word for a literary genre. We have now the genre of apocalyptic literature. So that would mean that the book of Revelation belongs to a family of similar types of writings. And when you know what that type of writing usually does, then you can sort of factor Revelation into that, and you can read Revelation as just another apocalyptic piece of literature. So we also have notions of an apocalyptic community. They are usually expecting, future looking, and so on, and an apocalyptic mindset and worldview. I don't have to get into that now. Now, genre is important, because when you and I sit down with a book, you will read, if you read a book of biology, you will read that book different than if you read a novel. You will come to that book with different expectations. If you open the book of Revelation as though Revelation is a typical book of the apocalyptic genre, you might just get things wrong. Because the genre did not exist when John wrote Revelation. He did not aspire to write a book that fit a certain genre. And determination of genre is helpful if we get it right, and it is it is worse than useless if we get it wrong, because then you will make assumptions about what you're reading, where you import ideas from other fields into the text, and that will throw you off. So we go now to the why question. So is Revelation the fruit of our wish to know? That is to say, is it our wish to know that determines it, or is it God's disposition to make known? And which of these would you say are the best answers to the why question? Is there a need here, and that need is so acute that it decides the rest of the story? Or is there a disposition here that really is the determinant? God's disposition to make known versus our wish to know. Which is it? So, with all due respect for the possibility that we have a wish to know, I think we need to assess, or the evidence is much stronger here. Sometimes we don't want to know. Sometimes we just don't, anything. We might hold opinions, we might hold convictions, we may be, religiously, politically, whatever, committed to a certain view. And if you come and tell me something else, I don't want to know. That is, you are not, so the wishing to know something is not necessarily the best view. Here we have a human and you can imagine this as though that is God, and you have a sort of plea arising from the human realm to a somewhat reluctant God to grant the wish, and that seems to me not to fit the evidence in Revelation. So, same thing in this illustration. Is the why question answered by an initiative from below? That is to say, a human subject knocking on heaven's door asking for access? Or is it answered from above, where the door is opened on the side of heaven and we are invited in? And my conclusion here is that God's desire to let us know exceeds our wish to know. And in the book of Revelation, the message to the church in Laodicea, there is a scene. There is someone standing at the door, knocking and asking for entry. Jesus is speaking in that part of the book, saying, I stand at the door and knock. So there is a divine figure then knocking on humanity's door. This has deep roots. The roots of Revelation is why they run deep in the Bible. And here is a scholarly treatment of Abraham and the political philosophy you can derive from Abraham's discussion with God over the fate of Sodom. This is God talking in both of these texts. And God says to himself, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? And then God answers the question, no, for I have known him. And so, what's the take-home message here? That God will not hide from the believer what God is doing and what God is usually doing. And the tenor of that text is, shall I hide from Abraham that which I do? Not merely on this occasion, but as a regular practice. So God aims for a relationship of information, insight, and even some degree of reciprocity. So let us say now a couple more things about the why of the book. That Revelation could also be called the book of divine transparency. To remedy the problem of ignorance, yes. To remedy the problem of concealment, yes. And to remedy the problem of slander, which is even worse than concealment, because concealment means that you're hiding something. Slander means that you're saying something that isn't true. So all of those things have relevance to the book of Revelation. So you have in some ways Revelation broadcasting in a world where there is also a fake news channel that claims to be fair and balanced, but it isn't. You see what I'm saying? And some of you will recognize allusions to things in our time. Don't make too much of them. And they are just very soft allusions. I am talking about the book of Revelation and the problem of fake news in that book. This one we will come to later and in much more detail. Two sides of the story in Revelation. One side practicing slander and deceit, and the other side countering the slander, countering the deceit with revelation. So, we are ready to conclude. And we have answered or explored the who, what, where, when, and why questions in Revelation. Who? John. What? Revelation. Where? Patmos. When? Late 1st century. And why? Access and transparency are embedded in the kind of person God is. That is the conclusion of